In 1939, one of the most amazing archaeological finds ever made in England was unearthed at Sutton Hoo in Suffolk. The outline of an ancient burial ship containing treasures including a stunning helmet from Britain's Dark Ages. And it suddenly shone a light on a forgotten warrior king. Because most historians believe the man who wore that helmet and was buried at Sutton Hoo was Raedwald, King of East Anglia. A man who was so powerful that he was acknowledged by all the other Anglo-Saxon kings at the time as the premier king, the Bretwalda. The fascinating archaeological discovery at Sutton Hoo was depicted in a 2021 film called The Dig, starring Ralph Fiennes. It tells the story of the amateur archaeologist Basil Brown, who just before the Second World War discovered that incredible Anglo-Saxon burial ship under an ancient mound in the East Anglian countryside. The boat itself was not actually found intact. It had rotted away in the acidic soil, leaving its ghostly outline in the sand, along with the ship's iron rivets, all in position. And despite the fact that the treasures were laid out as if surrounding a body, no bones were found. Some scholars argued that it was more of a cenotaph rather than a grave. However, in 1967, soil analysis found traces of phosphate showing that the treasure had indeed surrounded a body. And in that burial chamber included the most incredible treasures, including a gold belt buckle weighing a pound or 400 grams, an intricate ornate sword, and that amazing helmet, which, with its cheek shields, almost looks like a mask. These treasures, including the helmet, are now displayed at the British Museum in London. The find of the Sutton Hoo ship, which dated from the early 600s, shocked the archaeologists and forced them to rethink their perceptions of the Dark Ages in Britain. The Dark Age has long been used as a term by historians for the period from when the Romans left Britain in the early 400s to the arrival or re-arrival of Christianity over 200 years later. A period when pagan settlers from northern Germany and Denmark, the Angles, the Saxons and the Jutes, arrived on the southern and eastern shores of Britain, bringing a new language, new customs, and shunning the island's Roman legacy. Instead of urban trading towns, these new settlers lived in small rural communities with homes made from wood and thatch rather than brick and tiles. Instead of Christianity with its one god, these incomers worshipped a collection of gods, such as Thunor, the god of thunder, Frigga, the goddess of love, Tiw, the god of war, and above them all, the god of all gods, Woden. Incidentally, these gods are still referred to in English days of the week. Thunor's Day, Thursday, Frigga's Day, Friday, Woden's Day, Wednesday, and most obviously, Tuesday. And as these settlers expanded inland, their culture, their languages, and their gods spread with them. The Romano-British population either intermarried with the incomers and adopted their customs, or retreated westwards in front of them, fighting a series of battles as they went. This is the period of the King Arthur stories. And whereas the story of the Roman Empire was carefully recorded for posterity, the Anglo-Saxon epic stories and sagas were related orally, and thus their stories mixed fact with fiction and changed with retellings, and many simply disappeared over time. And it didn't help that what records were eventually written towards the end of this period were subsequently destroyed in Viking raids. So in more ways than one, historians definitely saw this period as a Dark Age. They really hadn't got a clue what was going on. Consequently, it was often seen as barbaric and backward. And then in 1939, the Sutton Hoo burial ship suddenly shone a light on these Dark Ages and changed historians' paradigms. The treasures in that burial ship highlighted a trading network that connected Dark Age Britain to the furthest corners of Europe. Plate and coins from the Byzantine Empire centred in modern-day Istanbul, right at the far end of the Mediterranean. Spoons with Greek writing on them, vases from Italy. And intriguingly, some of the metal jewellery had designs not seen anywhere else in Europe, which meant, apart from the revelation that these Dark Age Anglo-Saxons were trading widely, that they were also capable of producing incredible pieces of decorative art in their own right. With the quantity and quality of treasures uncovered in that ship at Sutton Hoo, it was obviously the resting place of a very wealthy and very powerful person, someone at the pinnacle of Anglo-Saxon society. The burial mound at Sutton Hoo, on the banks of the tidal River Devon in modern-day Suffolk, was just 4 miles from the main residence, at that period, of the kings of East Anglia. So it made sense that the deceased was probably from the royal family. But the sheer size of the treasure, and indeed the size of the burial mound itself, suggested that even among local kings, this was someone really special. And all roads led to one Anglo-Saxon king above all others. Most, although not all, historians agree that the treasures of Sutton Hoo most likely belonged to Raedwald, the Anglo-Saxon king of East Anglia, from the late 590s through to the 620s. And he was no ordinary Anglo-Saxon king, but a mighty Bretwalda. So, who was Raedwald, and how does he fit into the story of England? Originally, the Angles and Saxons, and let's not forget the Jutes, were not some unified political entity that arrived here on the shores of Britain with an agenda to form a country called England. Rather, they were a patchwork of tiny settler communities that slowly formed into petty kingdoms around families and strongmen. Kingdoms like Godalmingас, based around Godalming in Surrey, Lindsey in North Lincolnshire, the kingdom of the Howissa in modern-day Gloucestershire and Worcestershire, the Middle Saxons of Middlesex, Deira in Yorkshire, Bernicia in the northeast. Over time, through marriages, alliances and wars, 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were left standing, which some historians refer to as the Heptarchy. Northumbria in the north, Mercia in the Midlands, Wessex to the southwest, Sussex on the south coast, Kent in the southeast corner of Britain, Essex, and of course, East Anglia. To the north and west of the Anglo-Saxons, the Britons still dominated the island. And rather like the Anglo-Saxons, these British territories, whilst sharing a common language, heritage and religion, they, unlike the newcomers, were Christians, were not a single political entity, but a patchwork of kingdoms. Even the countries we now know as Wales and Scotland were divided into competing kingdoms. And on the west coast of Scotland, another group of incomers, Irish settlers from Ulster, had carved out their own Gaelic kingdom called Dalriada. At this stage in British history, quite frankly, it wasn't clear who was going to come out on top, these Anglo-Saxon kingdoms or the old British kingdoms. And it certainly wasn't clear there was ever going to be a united country called England, or Wales or Scotland for that matter. Despite there being 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, there were moments where a dominant king emerged, whom the Anglo-Saxon chronicles refer to as Bretwaldas. Loosely translated, it means Britain or wider ruler. Despite that title, they certainly didn't rule all of Britain, nor even what we now call England. They were more like first amongst equals, whom other kingdoms regarded with a mixture of awe and fear, and to whom they paid tributes. Only 7 Anglo-Saxon kings were ever referred to as Bretwaldas, and one of those 7 was Raedwald, King of East Anglia. The Kingdom of East Anglia consisted of the modern-day counties of Norfolk, Suffolk and Cambridgeshire, an area that at the time was almost cut off from the rest of the England by the Fenlands, a huge marshland that ran in from the Wash to almost the current site of the town of Ely. Indeed, Ely was still an island in the marshlands until after the Norman conquest and became the centre of anti-Norman resistance led by Hereward the Wake. Like a lot of facts that are lost to the Dark Ages, we don't know exactly when the Kingdom of East Anglia came into being, but historians believe it was founded by King Wulfar, who established the Wulfingast dynasty in the early 500s. Raedwald, Wulfar's grandson, was born sometime between 560 and 580, that's as good as we get, and came to the throne in around 599 AD. Before I go on, my regular viewers and subscribers will have spotted that this is a slightly different story to some of my usual ones that focus on the 19th century British Empire and the World Wars. But if you're enjoying it and would love to hear more stories like this from British history, then please type yes in the comments. And now, back to the Dark Ages. It was around the time that Raedwald became King of East Anglia that St Augustine arrived in the Kingdom of Kent on a mission from Pope Gregory to try and convert the pagan Anglo-Saxons, with their gods like Woden and Tiw, to Christianity. Their king, who happened to be the current Bretwalda, converted to Christianity, and swiftly the Kingdom of Essex, just across the Thames, which was in Kent's sphere of influence, followed suit. And about 10 years later, in 605, Raedwald adopted this new Christian religion too. Mind you, despite his conversion, Raedwald kept a pagan altar alongside his Christian one, so he was definitely keeping his options open on both who would help him and who would look after him in the afterlife. And quite frankly, there his story might have disappeared into history, had a young royal exile not turned up at his feasting hall. In the north of England, Aethelfrith, the warlike king of Bernicia, around modern-day Newcastle, had taken over the Yorkshire-based kingdom of Deira, establishing the Kingdom of Northumbria. We can't be certain exactly how he ended up in charge of Deira. It could have been through marriage, but based upon his warrior credentials, it was more likely a violent takeover. In 603, he then defeated an invasion from the Gaelic kingdom of Dalriada at the Battle of Degsastan. His armies then swept into modern-day Lancashire, splitting the northern Brythonic peoples in Cumbria and above from the southern Britons in Wales. And finally, in 615, he took on the Welsh kingdom of Powys at the Battle of Chester. The Christian Welsh were accompanied to the battle against pagan Aethelfrith by over 1,000 monks from their monastery at Bangor-on-Dee. And as the two armies gathered, somewhere to the south of Chester, possibly around Heron's Bridge for those of you who know the city, the war cries of the opposing armies were drowned out by the chants and prayers of the massed ranks of monks. The King of Northumbria decided that praying for his defeat was akin to wielding a sword, and promptly sent his army wading into the monks. All 1,000 were massacred. The shocked army of Powys fled before it was their turn. So now you can see why I said he probably took over Deira by force. It was his style. Aethelfrith was the dominant player in England north of the Humber. But he had a problem. A young prince from the royal house of Deira by the name of Edwin had escaped his clutches and was now on the run. And the last thing Aethelfrith needed was a pretender like Edwin, threatening to either break Deira away from his grasp or with his royal blood possibly take over the whole of Northumbria, a bit like a reverse takeover in business. Edwin needed to be eliminated. Interesting story, you may say, but what has this got to do with Raedwald and the Sutton Hoo Helmet? Well, having first sought refuge in the North Welsh kingdom of Gwynedd, Edwin moved on to Mercia before turning up seeking sanctuary in East Anglia. The Northumbrian warrior king sent an envoy to Raedwald, asking him to hand over Edwin. The East Anglian king refused. Aethelfrith then offered a large quantity of treasure in return for the rival prince. And according to the Venerable Bede, writing about 100 years after these events, Raedwald quite liked the bribe and was all for sending Edwin back to Aethelfrith's tender mercies when his wife stepped in. She argued that he was a king and he had given his word to offer sanctuary to this young prince. As even the offer of treasure was not having the desired results, Aethelfrith chose one last option. The greatest warrior in northern England, if not indeed northern Britain, told Raedwald in no uncertain terms that if he didn't cooperate, he would come down to East Anglia, destroy Raedwald and grab Edwin. And let's face it, he had a proven track record in that department. So what was Raedwald to do? Well, he probably wanted to hand over Edwin because East Anglia wasn't exactly known for its military prowess. But that option was going to lead to a major matrimonial dispute which he didn't relish. Moreover, he certainly didn't want to lose the kingdom that his grandfather had founded. So he only had one thing left that he could do. Raedwald mustered the East Anglian army and decided to strike first. Together with his son, Reganhera, and the exiled Prince Edwin, and let's face it, he was the cause of this problem, so he had to show willing, Raedwald marched north towards the border of Northumbria. And again, we can't be sure whether he marched through Mercia or whether he crossed the sands of the Wash, but in AD 616 he marched up the old Roman road from Lincoln to Doncaster and arrived on the east bank of the River Idle, a tributary of the Trent. And there he met Aethelfrith and his Northumbrian army. The veteran victors of Chester and Degsastan versus the tractor boys of East Anglia. Raedwald divided his army into three. He commanded one section, his son Reganhera another, and young Prince Edwin, who'd caused all this trouble, the final third of the army. Now, Aethelfrith of Northumbria had no real argument with Raedwald, apart from the fact he'd ignored his requests. It was Edwin he was after, and there he saw him on the other side of the river bank. The Northumbrian king, along with his bodyguard, charged straight across the River Idle, making a beeline for Edwin. Hacking their way through the East Anglians, they reached the young commander, and the horrified Raedwald watched as he was cut down. It was a masterstroke by Aethelfrith, but he had made a terrible mistake. He had killed the wrong young commander. At his feet lay not Edwin of Deira, but Reganhera, Prince of East Anglia. Raedwald let out a roar, and his army charged. This battle was now personal, and there'd be no quarter given. And there on the banks of the River Idle, the mighty Aethelfrith, master of the north of England, was slain along with most of his army. The river ran red with the blood of the Northumbrians. Edwin was now installed on the throne of Northumbria by the victorious Raedwald, and it was Aethelfrith's son's turn to flee into exile. With his protégé on the throne of Northumbria, Raedwald was the first southern king to ever exert influence north of the River Humber. In the same year as the battle on the River Idle, the King of Kent, the previous Bretwalda, died. With the King of Kent dead, and with Raedwald victorious over the mighty Aethelfrith and his protégé on the throne of Northumbria, he was the dominant king in the south of England, if not the whole of what is now England. It was only natural that Raedwald was now acknowledged as the Bretwalda. He ruled East Anglia as a half-Christian, half-pagan king for another 8 years. In 624, maybe 625, Raedwald died peacefully and was buried at Sutton Hoo. And there is speculation that some of the treasure trove buried with him consisted of tributes paid by other Anglo-Saxon kings to the Bretwalda. Raedwald was one of only 7 Anglo-Saxon kings to ever be called a Bretwalda, and the only one from East Anglia. Whilst East Anglia would continue as a kingdom for another 200 years, its moment in the sun was over. With Raedwald's death, the centre of gravity in Anglo-Saxon England moved north to a new Bretwalda, Edwin of Northumbria. He would prove to be every bit as warlike as Aethelfrith, expanding Northumbrian power and battling his neighbours. Eventually in 633 he was killed in battle, taking on the Welsh Christian king Cadwallon and the pagan king Penda of Mercia. What a great name! Maybe I should do a talk about Penda in the future. So the next time you visit the British Museum in London and look at those treasures from Sutton Hoo and see those invisible eyes staring back at you from that amazing helmet, remember the story of Raedwald, the warrior king of East Anglia, and Bretwalda from the Dark Ages in Anglo-Saxon England. As I said earlier, that story was a little bit different to usual, and if you enjoyed it then please give me a like, and if you'd like more stories from further back in British history, please type yes in the comments. A big thanks to Sean Ruddy, Terry Humphrey and John Drinsden for joining my members channel here on YouTube, and Holger Ellison for becoming a patron. I'm Chris Green, the History Chap. Thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I'll see you again very soon.